Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Summer's here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
There's a cell where everybody leaves cigarettes because there was a guy who was almost beheaded. We're in the dark. I have a camera. He's got one. I'm filming one way because I'm hearing footsteps coming towards me. He's seeing things at the end of the tier the other way with his camera. He just happened to spin his camera around and focus on the cigarette. The moment that it tilted back, like somebody was trying to hit it, and then laid back down.
Welcome to Critical Incidents Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Ashley, a law enforcement veteran with over a decade of experience. Each episode, I'll be interviewing people about their own critical incident, a moment in their lives that shaped who they are today. From life-threatening emergencies to personal struggles, we'll hear firsthand accounts of resilience, determination, and the power of the human spirit. So sit back and let's dive into the critical incidents that shaped their lives and made them who they are.
I've been a paranormal researcher, investigator, and now I'm a published author for the past 20 years. And I started when I was a teenager going out with my friends. We would sneak into places, and I don't condone trespassing, but we were sneaking into cemeteries and I live right outside of Franklin, Tennessee, which was a huge Civil War battle. And we sneak in a place over there that still has bloodstains in the floors, like huge bloodstains in the floors where they used it as a hospital. And it's just notoriously haunted. And that's kind of what you did in high school. But what kind of kicked me into that was my father passed away when I was 14. And so I wanted to prove to myself that he just didn't go into nothing. And so kind of seeking out ghosts and the paranormal and trying to prove that there's something intelligent there, that it's actually a soul that went. It's not just like an imprint on the environment or anything like that. And so I've kind of been chasing that ever since. I've kind of been haunted my entire life, though. My first experience was when I was 8 years old. I woke up out of a dead sleep, and my door was open, and there was a glowing woman in the doorway. And it really scared me, so I jumped up, slammed the door, and turned the light on, and of course she was gone. And it's just kind of been paranormal life ever since then. And so it just led into investigating. Once I figured out when I was around 18 and the TV show started coming on, I figured out, oh, there are people that actually go out and do this as a hobby. And now you got people on TV doing it. I, would go out with other groups, and kind of rolled into me planning my own public ghost hunts once I was experienced. So to let other people come and buy a ticket who don't have a team, aren't experienced, and learn how to do what we do.
That is really, really cool. And there's so many questions I have. The first thing that comes to mind when you're talking about this is that TV show Ghost Adventures, right? So I think about that. When you go do these ghost hunts and stuff, do you use the equipment like they do?
A lot of teams do. I'm not a big equipment person. I'm very kind of scientifically minded, and I will throw out evidence if I can prove that it's anything other than something I can't, other than paranormal, something outside the normal. And so I don't believe in a lot of the equipment, and I'm not going to go around and tell other people what they should and shouldn't do, when they investigate. But a lot of it's fallible, And the reason they use it on TV is because there's lots of sounds and lights and flashing things. And so it's visually interesting because for the most part, what we do is like fishing. We sit in the dark, quiet a lot of the times, and it's boring. And so if they put that on TV, who would watch it? So they want the bells and whistles and the, lights and flashing and all that stuff and the excitement. I just don't believe in a lot of that stuff. I'm kind of very simple. I like to use audio and video, and there's some techniques that I use with that I try to take the whole human element out of it. So like people, I've been asked if I believe in Ouija boards. Well, if I can see that planchette move when nobody touches it, when there's no person involved, then I might believe that's paranormal. But when people have their hands on it, I don't know what their intentions are. And even if none of them have any bad intentions, subconsciously, they could be moving it. So I'm very skeptical about a lot of that stuff, especially the phone apps and things like that. And also TV is all about ratings. And if they don't get ratings, they're not going to be on TV. If nobody's watching, advertisers aren't going to advertise and they're not going to get paid. So it's TV's different. I know some people from TV. I'm friends with a couple of guys that used to be on Ghost Hunters, and they're very legit investigators, but they'll be the first ones to tell you that the producers, edited things to look a certain way that really didn't happen to make it more dramatic and things like that. So it's a little bit different. And also we don't always catch something. We'll sit there for 8-12 hours in a location and we rotate around, different spots and different hot spots where we've been told stories and things. But on TV, they're there maybe up to 6 or 7 days, and they might get one EVP, one voice on a recorder or one shadow on a camera, to where normally we're just there for a night, because most of the places are, they charge money. I mean, I own a location, I charge money. And so, it's not feasible when you're paying $200 or $300 that night for 8 hours. We don't have a budget like a TV show does because we do it for free. And also going in to help people in their homes, people that need help. That's, we never charge for that, because how do you charge for something that you can't prove that you did? So.
How would you go into someone's house and help them? What does that look like?
The biggest thing that you do in that situation is the mental part of it, because I don't think it's anything to be scared of. In my 20-something years, I've never come across anything I would call demonic. I've come across spirits that I would say they're assholes in life and they're assholes in death. Why would their attitude change? They were just nasty people in life. And so they're mean, but they also, I think some of them feel like you're invading their space too. And so, but I think it's more of a mental aspect, especially with if you go into a home that's having issues with a family that has like small kids and it's affecting the kids, because I think the parents feel helpless because they don't know what to do. It's not their world. And so it's more going in and educating them that it's not anything that's going to hurt them, and giving them the power to take over their space again, to say, no, this is my house now. You need to leave us alone. Very rarely do we need to get other people involved, like clergy or anything like that. There were once people too. So usually if you're, respectful but firm, they'll leave you alone. Hey, you're scaring my kids, and also going in and actually catching evidence and looking at the history of the location to try to figure out who the person was. It may be some little old granny who owned the house for 60 years and lived there, and she doesn't mean to scare the kids or the people. And once they know who it is, and it fits their description of what they've seen and stuff, and they know it's not anything evil, I think that calms people's nerves too. The first approach going into any of those situations is kind of doing a mental health evaluation over the phone, because there's so many cases of where you have a person who has a mental health issue and they chalk it up to the paranormal, whether it be, especially with like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, things like that. And that's kind of where my medical training come in, because in the ambulance, I worked for 15 years as a medic on the ambulance in the ER, and for 20 years total medicine, but I dealt with a lot of psychiatric patients and mental health patients. And so that was kind of when I don't do a whole lot of private investigations anymore, but when I did, the phone conversation was kind of the first thing. And then to advise them, I'll ask about meds, are you on any medications? Do you have a family history of mental health issues? And trying to, if they do, trying to ease into that and explain to them, this may be something mental health related and not paranormal. But you can also have environmental factors in a house too. You can have pipes that bang in, like a faucet, in a sink faucet. If the rubber seals get old, the faucet can turn itself on. The water pressure pushing against, well, it can turn itself on. And so just natural things like that aren't anything paranormal, but when people aren't educated and they don't know, then they kind of get scared. So it's a lot about education going into somebody's house for sure.
That's really good to take that much in-depth look into what's going on, their mental health and then the structure of the house and really how it's affecting them. I think that would be a big one because, I think about the times where I don't want to accept or acknowledge that maybe I saw something that was paranormal. I just don't want to accept that. But I think in the other space, it hasn't been like a poltergeist activity. Like nothing's been thrown at me or, doors have opened and stuff. But it's more about how you were saying it's like malevolent people or malevolent ghosts. I haven't experienced anything like that. Is there a bigger difference, I guess, with what we assume would be like a haunting versus a poltergeist haunting?
Yeah, there's a difference between a haunting. So a haunting typically it would be your typical hauntings. There's two explanations that we kind of go. We have two different theories. You have an intelligent haunt, which is a spirit that will interact with you, that will answer questions. It's an intelligent thing. And then you have what we think is like a imprint on the environment. It used to be called stone tape theory. And so we think that kind of because we're surrounded by electromagnetic fields, we have one inside our own bodies. That's what makes your muscles move, your brain work and all that. So if that can be recorded on the environment, kind of like a VHS or cassette tape, the old VHS and cassette, they were recorded on, tape with a magnet. And that's how it was read by the VCR or the cassette player or whatever. So we think that maybe that can be imprinted on the Earth's environment because the Earth, we're surrounded by magnetic activity all the time on the Earth too. And so those are your two kind of classic hauntings. Poltergeist is a little bit different because poltergeists are believed to be, even kind of by some of the scientific community, like the parapsychologists who actually have degrees in parapsychology and do studies on these things scientifically, they believe that it's more psychokinetic, which is mind. And it typically happens around teenagers when they are going through puberty, specifically teenage girls. Kind of that confusing part of life, the change from kid to adult, all of the emotions and things. It almost kind of becomes its own, even though it doesn't have a consciousness, kind of becomes its own entity sometimes outside of them, which is kind of weird, but kind of like a tulpa. They have tulpas and golems and things like that, which are thought forms. But it's widely believed that the psychokinetic power of, especially like I said, young females, they're not controlling it. They don't know they're doing it. But when they get overly emotional, things tend to fly around the room, doors open, slam, things like that. So
there's scientists that are, I guess, theorizing that people are making this energy based on themselves, which is affecting their environment.
Yeah. Almost like the best way I can explain it, almost like a solar flare. You know how the sun has all that activity going on and every so often it'll throw off a solar flare, which is magnetic energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it affects a lot of things on Earth, with our communications, everything. Kind of like that, because we have our own electromagnetic field. And they think maybe with all that bottled up emotion and stuff, it causes kind of an outburst of that energy. And it reacts with physical things in the environment.
I mean, logically, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just hard to prove things like that because it's hard to visualize those things. I mean, there are cameras that you can see the electromagnetic fields and things, but it's hard to capture, And also in science, when you're doing an experiment, you want to repeat it. Well, that's the problem with the paranormal. It's hard to repeat, the same thing over and over to get a scientific theory proven.
Yeah. What do you believe ghosts are? Do you believe that they're the spirits, the souls, and where do they exist? Right. And so, I'm trying to think from from our standpoint, like I have my senses. And if I'm in this room, how does something else exist in the room and what realm are they in? Like, how does that interact with one another? Because I've always had this saying, right? So it's not fair if a ghost is able to touch me, but I cannot touch it. That's not fair, right? And, so I can't comprehend that. What's your evaluation of that?
I think after all the years and talking to so many people, like with the podcast and just being picking people's minds who have been doing this longer than I have, what physicists have come to believe is that everything has a wavelength. and we're all a vibration. And so every atom has its own wavelength. And so I think that we're just on a different wavelength than the spirits are. I think it's a different plane of existence, whether you want to call it another dimension or whatever you want to call it. And this is why I believe that. You can have 5 people in a room and a spirit can manifest in front of you, all of you. Everybody will see something different. Everybody will experience something different. So one person might see the full body apparition of a person. Another person might see a smoke, what looks like smoke. Somebody else might just see a shadow figure. Somebody might see an orb. But I think it's because we all have a slightly different frequency that we vibrate on. And so the people that will see the full body apparition, they're on kind of the same level as that spirit. The other way that I think this works is with audio experiment that I do when I do public ghost hunts. I do something called a roundtable EVP session. So we put a recorder down in the middle, we get everybody in a circle, and we all decide on the same question to ask. And we go around the room and every person asks the same question. And a lot of the times you'll get an answer to only one person in the room. And every question you ask, that one person is who they'll talk to if you get an answer. And so they're on this, maybe that's the only person they can hear. Do you know what I'm saying? Because they're on the same wavelength vibration or whatever.
I don't know the best way to describe this. Like when they pass away and, you know, whatever happens in the afterlife, do you think that this is still them, or is this the imprint of them left on Earth from the magnet frequency and all that?
Yeah. I think it depends. I think it depends on the spirit and the haunting. The house that I own, the night house, I believe there are 3 intelligent spirits there that have not crossed over to wherever we go for whatever reasons. I don't think they're stuck. I think it's of their own choosing. But then I think there's other things that happen around there with doors shutting on their own and knocks and things that are kind of echoes of the past. I think a haunting can be some other things too. Just from hearing stories and talking to people, I think you can also have some sort of time slips in there sometimes to where we're the ghost to them and they're the ghost to us. Kind of like that movie, The Others, with Nicole Kidman, where she thinks the house is haunted, but really they're the ghost. And she's still living in her time frame. But time has moved like 40 years into the future, you know, to the spiritualist movement, and she's the ghost to them. Also, there's another famous story from Andrea Perron. Her family were the ones who experienced the Conjuring house, what has become be known as Conjuring house. So the very first Conjuring movie is about her family. And she grew up in that house for 10 years. Sometimes she was 12 till she was 22. And she tells the story about her and her mom were in one of the living rooms. There's several living rooms in the house. And they were looking towards the fireplace, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this family was sitting around a dining room table eating dinner. And she said the 2 men sitting at the table just turned and looked at her and her mother and smiled and said it lasted about 30 seconds, and then they disappeared. And so she said, were we the ghost to them? And that's why they looked and smiled, because they saw us, and the wife and kids didn't. You know what I'm saying? They were being haunted by the future, in a way. And they were the ghosts to Andrea and her mom, but really it was just a time slip.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a way to look at it. I never even thought about it like that.
Even with Bigfoot, I've got a theory that maybe what we're seeing is a creature that lived before. And I always tell people, if you think about it this way, when you see a bear or a deer in the woods, you don't go poke it in the ass to make sure it's real, right? So if you see a Bigfoot in the woods, it may be, I'm not saying all Bigfoot are that, because they do have footprints and they have gotten hair and now DNA and things that don't match anything else. But I think sometimes the way that Bigfoot disappears, I think sometimes maybe it's a time slip from like some of our ancestors that were more ape-like, or some sort of creature that was a Bigfoot type creature 1,000, 10,000 years ago. Maybe it's just a time slip or a haunting of Bigfoot,
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Like logically, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me about this house that you got.
So it's kind of just happened last year, but the 24th of April this month, we've owned it a year. I was talking to one of my paranormal buddies who I've done some short documentary films with, and he's one of my investigative partners, Austin Lawrence. And we were talking on the phone one night, just BSing, and I was on the computer while we were talking on the phone. And we started talking about owning our own location one day, how that would be fun. That would be cool because you can do ongoing experiments to where, like I was talking about earlier, we only normally spend, 8 hours in a location, or maybe up to 12. Well, if you own your own location, you have access to it all the time. And so you can do, multiple nights and things like that. Well, Facebook and your phone and everything listens to you. So this group popped up that I was not a part of on Facebook called Old Houses $50,000 and Beyond. And the point of this organization, they actually have a website and they have hundreds of thousands of followers. But the reason they started this and the reason it's so popular is because they're trying to get these old houses to be bought by people to save them, because a lot of them are being threatened to be torn down and the history is gone, and, build a new house or apartments or whatever. So I started looking on there and I realized how really actually cheap compared to new houses these older houses were. And so I went and talked to my husband, and because he's kind of the money person, and I was like, look at this. So I got him on board, and not just for the paranormal, but for the history aspect, because probably 80% of what we do in the paranormal is history. Because if you don't understand the history of a place, you can't understand who's there haunting it or why it would be haunted to begin with, But we wanted a historical house that we could buy and save and open to the public. And we stumbled across the Night House in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And Hopkinsville is about an hour and a half from where we live in Middle Tennessee, outside of Nashville. And we had looked at several others, but when we looked at the Night House, we kind of drove away talking like it was already ours, even though we wouldn't own it for another 3 months. And we looked at other houses, and we thought the deal had completely fallen through with the owners. And they actually came back to the table and underbid themselves, and we bought it. And it has this incredible history that the town of Hopkinsville doesn't even really know, that this family, the Knights, were very influential. There's a lot of other names of people that were friends with the Knights and were movers and shakers at the same time, but for some reason the Knights had kind of been forgotten. But the house has always been a residence, and so we opened it up to the public last year. So for 210 years, it's residence. And we call it the Night House because the Knights lived there for 85 years of the 200-year history. So they were the dominant family, and they kind of changed the house the way it looks today. So originally it would just been the red brick structure. They actually added the porch on with the big columns, and then they added the side porch with the 2-story columns. They turned it into Greek Revival. They changed the house a lot. So they had a huge influence on the house. J.B. Knight, the head of the family who bought the house, he was an attorney, but he was a real estate mogul. And in the 1850s and 60s, he's worth about $40 million in today's money. He owned thousands and thousands of acres, multiple properties. He owned properties in Chicago. In 1871, when the Great Chicago Fire happened, he actually had a 3-story apartment building burned down that he owned. So he did business in New Orleans, Philadelphia, all over. Yeah, just kind of assumed that there would probably be some sort of activity, whether it was intelligent or residual or what. But we bought it for the historical aspect of it. It's the oldest standing structure in the entire county, and one of the oldest standing structures in Kentucky. It was built in 1815. So for it to stand the test of time, with it always being a residence, a lot of places like that will fall in disrepair because at some point in time they'll become abandoned or something. But it never really has. It's always had people take care of it. So we are just now the caretakers.
Is it open to the public for the historical value and for ghost hunting?
We rent it out on Friday and Saturday nights for the ghost hunters, and we do public ghost hunts for people that don't have teams and stuff. We have one coming up here soon. But on Friday, Saturday, Sundays, I offer historical tours for $10 a person, where I do an hour and a half history tour of the house. And the house has a huge history. It has some Civil War history that's kind of unique, to where there was never any battles in Hopkinsville, but there was a plague that went through the Confederate soldiers when they had taken over Hopkinsville, and it killed 300 soldiers. Well, they used the basement as a hospital for these plagued soldiers, and it was some sort of virus that killed them. They all died of pneumonia, and they identified 200 of them, because back then they didn't have dog tags, they didn't have licenses, nothing like that. So if they didn't have like a letter in their pocket or something that identified them with their name on it, they just buried you in a mass grave. So there's 100 Confederate soldiers buried in Riverside Cemetery in Hopkinsville in a mass grave that died of that plague. And they still don't know what what actually caused the plague. They call it black pox pneumonia, and it caused these black blisters to come up on the skin, but they ultimately died of pneumonia.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so do you monitor the house 24/7?
Yeah, I have 8 cameras in the house and 4 outside, and I get alerts on my phone. The spirits are quite active even when we're not there. I have plenty of videos of what sounds like furniture moving and doors closing on their own, actual furniture moving on camera, all kinds of stuff, voices. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of crazy stuff. The house is 6 different levels. It's a 5,600 square foot mansion. It's massive. Yeah, it's a big old house.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome for, the town and the historic. Preserving those things it is important. I think that if we turn those things into apartments, we're doing a disservice from the community that held the property at such high standards in the growing periods of our country.
Yeah, and we've heard the road that goes in front of town, it's 7th Avenue now, but it used to be called Russellville Pike. And the road's been there since the early 1800s, before the house was even built. So you have all these people, and it's kind of one of the main thoroughfares kind of out of town to go to central Kentucky, like Bowling Green and stuff. So if you want to take the highway instead of interstate. And so I've heard so many people say, I grew up here. I've driven by that house so many times and just wanting to go see inside because it's such an interesting house. And so it's nice to offer that to people now to come in and see. It's a very weird house. The 6 levels is weird. There's a weird set of steps that are like pie shaped and they get smaller as you go up them. And it's a very, very weird house. It has a basement and a cellar. And then outside at the end of the driveway, there's a red barn that has a cellar under it too. A 6 foot deep cellar that stacks stone. So weird. Yeah. There's lots of interesting things. We found lots of interesting things too. We have a whole cabinet of just 1850, 1860s things and on up through the history of the house. I have a piece of linoleum that we found in the closet from 1920s.
Wow.
When linoleum would have been the most expensive flooring at the time.
Yeah, well, if he's the real estate mogul, he's probably looking at what are you going to put in it.
Yeah, and these doorknobs, there's these interesting doorknobs. They almost look like a gnarled wood that's stained, but they're actually made out of clay. They're called Bennington clay doorknobs, and I looked them up, and they're invented in 1849 by a blacksmith, and he figured out this clay process to mix this clay, so it's different colors of brown, but it has these swirls in it, almost like a knotted wood, and they're very high polished and they're very heavy. And I found out that they would have been put in the house in the 1860s because that's when they're kind of popular, and they're very expensive. And even today, they're like $1,000 a piece because they just don't exist. Yeah, so we find things like that around the house.
That is so cool.
Yeah, we have a hand-carved duck decoy, wood duck decoy that's hand-carved that we found in the house. Square nails everywhere, which are handmade by a blacksmith. Yeah, all kind of interesting stuff. So
that's really cool. What out of all the investigations you've done, what's the one that sticks out the most to you?
Oh, that's a hard one because I've done so many investigations.
I know.
One of the ones that sticks out here recently, because I went there twice within like 6 months, is Brushy Mountain State Prison in Petros, Tennessee. Just because we had some incredible things happen there that I never had happen before. And I mean, I've heard voices, I've seen things, seen lots of things, heard lots of things with my own ears, capture stuff on camera, capture stuff on recorder. But Brushy was kind of a different beast. It's also massive. It's a huge prison. And Brushy, they called it the end of the line, and it was actually built as an upside down cross.
Oh,
yeah, as a warning that nobody can save you here, not even God, kind of thing. And they called it the end of the line because every person in there was either on death row or had a life sentence. So you have a whole prison full of men who have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So if you looked at somebody wrong, they just kill you. Because what are they going to do? Give you another life sentence or kill you again if you're on death row,
Yeah.
And they never killed anybody at Brushy that was on death row. They always sent them to Nashville, to the famous Castle prison in Nashville. It's been in all the movies where Green Mile was shot, and then the last Castle with James Gandolfini. They always sent them there. That's where the actual old Sparky was, where the electric chair and the lethal injection stuff. But Brushy Mountain is famous because James Earl Ray, who was convicted of assassinating Martin Luther King Jr., that's where he was most of his sentence. And he's the only one to ever successfully escape from Brushy. And they found him 7 days later in the mountains, almost dead, starvation and dehydration. So Brushy's in the Appalachian Mountains and very close to the Smoky Mountains. It sits in a valley. It backs up to a valley, and the mountain goes straight up on both sides of it. And so the front of the prison is the only thing that is in the valley. And so, yeah, if you escape, there's nothing for miles. I mean, still to this day, there's nothing for miles.
Wow.
You got houses and stuff and people live in, but Petros is a little town. If you blink, you'll miss it. You don't even know you go through it unless you see the sign that says Petros unincorporated, so even today it's really isolated, but now they've turned it, the guy that owns it now, it's a concert venue. I mean, they've had like AC/DC play there and things, and they got a big amphitheater. They got a distillery. They make their own booze. They've got a big restaurant there that you can go in and sit down and eat. Yeah, it's a big tourist spot now.
Dang.
But some incredible things. The prison was never heated or cooled.
Wow.
So no heat in the winter.
Yeah.
No air conditioning in the summer. So they just suffered. And it started out as a actual mining camp. And the state of Tennessee decided that they could actually make money by renting prisoners to the miners, the coal miner, the owners of the coal mine. So they started out that way. And then they ended up building the first prison that was made out of wood. And then they ended up building the big brushy now that's concrete and steel and all that. But we had some crazy things happen. There's on the third tier, I think of B block, there's a cell where everybody leaves cigarettes because there was a guy who was pretty much almost beheaded, who lived in that cell. They decided in the 1980s, that it'd be a good idea to do movie night. So they converted up by the medical wing of the prison on the second floor. They converted this area into a theater. Well, what did all these inmates who are on death row and have life sentences going to do in the dark? Kill each other. So the theater went away after 2 years because so many people died in the dark, being beheaded, disemboweled, all that stuff. Yeah, and then the warden thought, yeah, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. But there was one guy he had a life sentence and he had been there for a long, long time.
Okay.
And since I think he got convicted when he was like 18, and when he got murdered, he was like in his 50s. So everybody knew him, and he was well known. He's a nice guy from what they say, and the guards knew him, and he was trusted. He never tried to escape, none of that. Anyway, he ended up getting killed during movie night. But he always stood up at the end of the hallway outside of his cell and smoked and looked out the window. And so people have said they've seen him up there. So in his cell, people actually leave cigarettes, the cell that he occupied for 20, 30 years. Well, they also say if you light a cigarette and set it on the bars, you can watch the cherry like somebody's puffing on the cigarette. So I lit a cigarette and I set it on the flat part. So you have the round bars that come down, then you have the flat bars that go across. I set it on the flat bar. We're in the dark. It's just me and my buddy Austin investigating. I have a camera. He's got one. I'm filming one way because I'm hearing footsteps coming towards me. And we're up on the third tier of this prison. But I'm hearing footsteps coming towards me. He's seeing things at the end of the tier the other way with his camera. He just happens to spin his camera around and focus on the cigarette the moment that it tilted back, like somebody was trying to hit it, and then laid back down. But there's no way it could have done that without falling off. Even if it was a breeze, it wouldn't have laid back. It would have just fell off. But it hit an angle to where it should have slid off at least, the back of the bar. And we were both like, and the cherry maybe lights up a little bit, like somebody's puffing on it. But it's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And we caught it. We didn't know we even caught it on video until we were reviewing the video.
Wow.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah. Does it, when you see things like that after you're like reviewing it, or if you see it in person, every time I think about those things, I always get like the hairs on my arm standing up. Do you get that?
Sometimes. And not even that it scares me anymore, because I've seen and experienced so many things. I run toward the stuff, I don't run away from it. It excites me. It makes me excited to go out and try to experience that again. Not even necessarily at Brushy Mountain, but a different location, because I get excited to interact. Even going to the night house, we've owned it for a year. I'm there all the time. I spend the night there, back in my office. I have a whole kind of bedroom area for myself and office, because I spend the night when teams are in there every night. I get excited to go in there and talk to the spirits in there, because they react to me in the house. I come in and tell them good morning. I tell them good night when I leave, and they'll interact. The other day, because we're still doing some renovations, remodeling and things, and we had put there's a new wing that the previous owner built on for a modern kitchen. And we had put up tongue and groove real wood for the ceiling instead of drywall, because we went kind of that country kitchen look to kind of match the house. And so I was leaving and I was there by myself and I was walking through, turning the lights out and things like that, locking the doors. And I walked through the dining room. And as I was walking through the dining room, I said out loud to the spirits, I said, if you're happy with what we're doing with the renovations and the stuff we're doing in the kitchen and other things, please, let me know tonight by making noise or something on the camera. Well, I didn't even have to wait because as I was saying that, as I went out of the dining room and there was a loud bang in the dining room.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, I got you. You like what we're doing, I guess. And I have it on camera because when I walked around the corner, the foyer camera caught me and it heard me say, and you can hear the loud bang on the camera and stuff. But so that was interesting. Yeah. But things like that, sometimes when I'm walking around the house, I feel like somebody's walking right behind me. And I think they're just curious what we're doing. They don't ever do anything to scare anybody.
I think it's, not intentional, I suppose. I think that it would be interesting to experience that because everything that, for me, I would feel like, oh my gosh, I'm being attacked by everything. You know what I mean? Banging around to scare me. But is it like, what's like the prize, right? So what's the one thing that you're always looking for? Or is it not anything in particular? If I was hunting ghosts, I would want to see things move. I would want to see, intelligent door openings. Hey, if you're here, open the door, and then the door opens. Like, I would think that those would be really cool. Have you had anything like that?
Yeah, it happens sometimes. The Holy Grail that everybody says is kind of the full body apparition of seeing, or even a full body shadow figure of a shadow. I've seen a few of those. I've seen a couple of full body apparitions. That's pretty exciting. For me, I think what makes me the most excited is to get a vocal response on a voice recorder, especially when you get an answer to your question. So not even a yes and no question, but when you ask what's your name and you get back John or whatever, and it's clear, that to me is more exciting because that right there shows me intelligence. Like they're answering the exact question that I just asked. And then when you go through a session on the voice recorder to where you get multiple answers to questions, it's pretty incredible. So to me, that's like the penultimate, what I would love to happen to every location, because that's just, how can you disprove that?
I don't know that you can. I mean, is the audio that's being picked up, right? So is it stuff that you can hear with your own ears?
Yeah, I don't use any kind of editing software. The only thing I've ever done to a voice is to amplify it. Because when you get to mess, and especially with digital audio, when you get to messing with using filters and things, you can get into what we call pareidolia. And pareidolia can be, a lot of people think it's just with your eyes. So for anybody to know what pareidolia is, when you look at the clouds and you see an elephant in the clouds, that's pareidolia. That's your brain trying to make sense of nothing but chaos. If you stare at like static in a TV, you'll start to see images in it because your brain is trying to make, sense of what it's seeing. And so you can do that with people do that with the paranormal all the time, where they think they see something in a picture or something, but it's not. It's just the way the reflection is in the window, or it's a lens flare, in the picture, and it just happens to look like a face or head and shoulders or something. It's the same thing. Like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you have like a robe hanging, and you think somebody's standing in your room, something like that. That's pareidolia as well, because you just woke up and your brain's trying to make sense of what it's seeing, and then when you realize, oh, it's just my coat hanging there or a shirt or something, then you're like, well, that was stupid. Why did that scare me? But that's pareidolia. But you can do it with audio too. And especially when you're looking to hear voices and answers to your questions. So it's very easy to say, oh, I hear an answer there. And so that's why I like to run anything that I think I've actually caught a clear voice. I like to send to other investigator friends of mine who are like-minded like me, that will just throw out evidence if we can explain it at all. We're very skeptical, and have them listen. And if they hear the same thing, and I won't tell them what I heard. And if they hear the same thing, especially 2 or 3 of them, then it's kind of validated. But some of the voices I've caught are so clear that it's like me and you talking. It's just that for some reason at like a lower volume. It's like almost like a whisper, but you can clearly tell what they're saying.
Wow.
Yeah. I even got a horse whinny on EVP before.
Oh my gosh, that would be so much fun.
Yeah, there's a place in Gallatin, Tennessee called Rosemont, and it was never a plantation, it was a thoroughbred racehorse farm. And they actually produced the by breeding their horses, that's how they made their money, breeding racehorses. But they bred the grandfather of Secretariat, the famous racehorse. but we were in the basement, and yeah, we're recording, and out of nowhere, there's a horse whinnying. There's no horses within 10 miles of this place nowadays. It's in the middle of town, so that was pretty incredible.
That's pretty cool. I always see this, and maybe you can shed some light to this. So, you watch the TV shows, they're ghost hunting, and I've seen them go overseas. They're like in England or Ireland or wherever, China, Japan, it doesn't matter where they're at. But when they get like a voice come through and it's in English, I'm like, wait a second, hold on here. You know what I mean? So like you could tell there's some kind of, production to that. But have you captured things that are like, oh, like accent wise, or you can tell like the way they're talking is from a different time period?
Yeah, I've actually caught a Native American.
Oh.
And they were speaking their own language.
Wow.
Yeah. Accent wise, it's very hard to tell accent because it comes out very breathy, whispery. I think some of the words that we use, they don't understand sometimes because they're from 1800s or whatever.
Yeah.
So you kind of, and some of the words they use, you're kind of like, what? I don't know what they're talking about. But yeah, Native American, I've caught them talking their own language before.
Wow.
But I think, yeah, I'm with you. Like, yeah, if you go to another country where, like Spain or something, or Mexico, if you get EVPs, it should be in Spanish. It should not, be in English. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
There's so many cool stories that, I think you have to like want to see it. You have to want to believe what you're seeing. And I think that it's, for me, I believe it. I believe it exists. I just don't want to see it. You know what I mean? I know that it's there.
Yeah,
I just don't want to see it. And it's, but you see things, you hear things, and you're like, oh no, it's just the wind. The house is settling. We're fine.
Yeah. I think when I was younger, what kind of got me over the hump of being afraid of it, I was still curious enough that I wanted to experience it, but it still scared me. And I think what got me over the hump was just understanding, finally come to the realization that these were just people too. And they still are, just in a different form. And I also think when I've seen people I've been touched before. I've never been scratched or anything. I've been pushed. But to me, I don't think that's them being aggressive. I think even when people get scratched, I don't think it's necessarily them being aggressive or wanting to be mean to you or harm you. I think maybe that's the only way they can get their point across. So like they scratch people because they're trying to get you to listen and you can't hear them and they're frustrated. How frustrating would that be? Especially if you're by yourself, isolated for hundreds of years or whatever, and finally somebody somewhat notices you because for whatever reason they can see you or sense you or whatever, and you're trying to get their attention, Not saying there's not some nasty spirits out there that probably would shove you or whatever. One of the funniest times one of the funniest, most interesting times that I got touched, I was at a place called Thomas House in Red Bull Springs, Tennessee, and it's a big bed and breakfast. And it was opened as a resort back in 1927. They built it in the Cloyd Brothers Hotel. And the Red Bull Springs was founded around a healing mineral springs. So it's kind of during that boom where you had all these healing mineral springs, which really didn't heal anything. So a lot of people died there. But there's a story of this girl, Sarah, who's actually the niece of the Cloyd brothers, and she died of appendicitis. And that's real. She lived there and she died of appendicitis. And there's a room that they claim was hers. Well, I was standing in the doorway with my back to the hallway, and we were having a public ghost hunt, and I had six or seven people with me that I was guiding, and they were all in Sarah's room sitting on, there's 2 beds in there and some chairs. So they're all sitting around. I'm the only one standing. And I have my back, like I said, to the dark hallway. It's dark in the room other than we had a couple pieces of equipment, because when I do a public ghost hunt, I let people play with the equipment, even out in this, and I explain to them why I don't believe in it, whatever, but they want to see it because they see it on TV and stuff. So we let them play with it and make up their own mind. So the lights come off that. And one girl is doing this, what we call the Estes method. And what that is, for people who don't know, you put a blindfold on, you put headphones on, and the headphones are hooked to basically a broken radio. And the radio just rapidly scans through radio stations, and you'll hear voices in the white noise. You'll get answers to questions and things. And whoever's doing the Estes method with the blindfold and the headphones, that's so they can't hear the questions we're asking. So anyway, the girl that's doing that, she says, sit down. Well, she's got a blindfold on. She's not the only one standing. And I'm like, well, there's really nowhere for me to sit. I'm not going to sit down. And I get poked in the butt cheek by a finger of like a little kid is what it reminded me of. And I was like, what? And everybody's like, what? I said, I just got poked in the butt cheek. And it felt like a finger poked me in the butt cheek right after she had sat down, and I didn't. I was like, okay, I'll sit down, but it was like a little kid, like, yes, you're going to do, you need to sit down like everybody else. But that was kind of funny and interesting.
That is cool. I've seen that before, and it made so much sense because if like you can't see or hear the questions being asked, but if you are regurgitating the intelligent response through the white noise, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the most incredible Estes method I've ever seen happen at the Thomas house. The lady that was doing it, she came up with, just out of the blue, and we thought it was just whatever stuff from the radio or whatever, but she came up with names carved in a stone under a tree. And I've stayed at Thomas house, I don't know, probably 50 times, because I've done so many public ghost hunts up there, and know the owners really well and things. And at Thomas house is a bed and breakfast, so you spend the night, you get your own room that has your own bathroom. They have like 40 something rooms because it's a hotel, bed and breakfast hotel. And when you get up the next morning, they fix you a buffet style breakfast. And so we got up the next morning and everybody's eating breakfast, and we're kind of seeing our guest off because we'll be there the next day. And then Saturday night, we'll have a different group come in. And so we're talking, and we go ask the owners, does this mean anything? A stone under a tree with names carved in it. And they said their jaws dropped, because there's two brothers that own it, and they live there with their families in the building. And they said, I haven't thought about that. The one brother's like, I haven't thought about that since we moved in here 30 years ago. And he said that out under this big giant oak tree that had actually fallen in a storm, there was a stone with the Cloyd brothers' names carved into it, who originally built the hotel. And it's right at the edge of the driveway. And we went out and tried to find it. But over the years, where they had a driveway graveled and dirt on top, we couldn't dig down deep enough to find it. And I think the tree, this big giant oak tree, was probably 10 foot across. I mean, the stump was like 10 foot across. So the oak tree may have kind of swallowed it too over 30 years. But they verified that there's a stone there with names carved in it. Yeah, and she got it through the radio. And there's no way. I know the history of that place frontwards and backwards. And I've talked to the owners and heard story after story after story of the haunting stuff and the history, and nothing like that has ever come up. So there's no way that woman could have known it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just incredible.
That is so cool. So do you celebrate, I guess celebrate may not be the best word, but participate in Paranormal Day?
Because I do the paranormal all the time, not really.
It's just another day.
I think I'm going to this year with the Night House. I think I'm going to open it up to do, just to kind of get the general public involved. I'm going to open it up for free and do some free guided, haunted history tour, maybe like lantern tour or something, for like the first 15 people that sign up, for free, just for National Paranormal Day, but just to get more recognition for the house and get people to be more familiar with it.
That's awesome. What's the number one place where you're like, I really want to go and investigate this place? What's that for you?
So if you're talking Tennessee wise, because I'm a Tennessee native, it used to be the Castle Prison, the Tennessee State Prison in Nashville. We actually came very close, me and a couple of my friends, because like I said, I worked in EMS and I had some friends that worked in Metro EMS Nashville, and they actually went out and looked at it because it's fallen down. And so they actually had 3 people go out and look at it to see where we could go. And we were going to be the first ones to ever, and the only ones to ever have a state sanctioned investigation. 2 days after that, a tornado came through and tore more of it down, and now it's just too unsafe. So yeah, and so that would be a place, just because nobody's ever been in there to investigate officially. It's hard you can't even sneak in there. They still have guards on the property, and they don't let anybody up there. You can't go up there fly drones, can't go there take pictures, nothing. They will turn you around, and so they're not even allowing movies to film up there anymore, just because it's dangerous. But that was kind of the one that got away, because it was like, damn you, Mother Nature. 2 days later, a tornado comes through. That was a big one. I want to go somewhere because I'm interested in the locations that you've never heard of, because I find it more fascinating. Like everybody's heard of Waverly Hills, which is an incredible place in Louisville. Don't get me wrong. Waverly Hills is amazing, and not taking anything away from them. And lots of other places like that, like the Winchester Mystery House in California and things like that, are well known, and they're investigated to death. People and tourists go through them so much. So I like the places that never been investigated, nobody's ever been in. So I would say one of the places probably the White House. I think would be an interesting place to get into, because there are ghost stories that kind of leaked out over the years, like Lincoln's ghost and some of the other presidents and people who have, lived there and died there and things. And then I like to go overseas to some different places. It's places like Petra, and places like that I don't know if they've ever had it like a paranormal investigation. Like there are these mystical, amazing places that we really don't even know anything, like especially Petra, really don't know anything about the people who built it. We know they were rich and they were part of the Silk Road and all that, but to go in and try to connect with those people to find out the answers from them, just places like that. Some of the Aztec, places down in Mexico, Aztec Mayan, I think those would be really fascinating. Some of those big giant pyramids. Yeah, I think it would be really cool to investigate.
It would be. So when I was younger, I was a part of this like police department's, I don't know what they call it, explorers. They call them explorers. Like, hey, I want to be a cop one day, right? And they did all this training out in a piece of property called Eppington. It was Thomas Jefferson's daughter's house. And it's an old house. And they do tours of it for, the historical value. And a police officer actually lived out on the county property in like a trailer just to take care of it, make sure no one broke into it. I always wondered, because you'd go down in the cellar and it'd be dirt floors and they had the same dolls that she played with and all the same furniture. And I was like, this place would be really cool to be like ghost hunted. So I think about places like that and I'm like, I don't know that they have allowed people to do that, but those places I feel would have a lot of stories.
Yeah. Like even somewhere like Mount Vernon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Those historical places. Yeah. I think it'd be incredible.
Yeah.
To go and maybe talk to George Washington or like you're saying, Ben Franklin or, that would be insane.
Oh man, if you could catch one of those EVPs, wow. Well, tell me about your podcast. I want everyone to hear your podcast because it is, I love ghost stuff from afar. And so I'd like to hear more about what your podcast is about and let everyone know where they can find it.
I'm kind of on hiatus right now. At some point I will probably bring it back. I did it for almost 5 years and I have 170 episodes. And each episode I talk to a different guest. So I've talked to everybody in the paranormal at this point, but I had a different guest on every week talking about Bigfoot, dogmen, ghost. My forte, of course, is ghosts, like we talked about hauntings and stuff, but I'm curious about it all, UFOs, all that. And so just having different guests on each week and a casual conversation like we've been having. We talk about if they had books out or whatever, we talk about the books and things like that. But yeah, just a casual conversation. Some really interesting people too, like not even talking about famous people or like any para-celebrities, but just some of these homeowners who wrote a book about raising their family in a haunted house. Those are some of the most fascinating stories. One of the guys that comes to mind is Kent Wolf. I'm still friends with him on Facebook and chat with him, but I had him on and he's not an author. He's not a paranormal guy, but back in the 80s, he got divorced and him and his 2 daughters and his girlfriend at the time, his fiance, moved into this haunted, like old farmhouse. And he wrote a book, not even being an author or anything about it. It's very fascinating. It's very interesting, especially talking to somebody outside of the paranormal who doesn't do it. That was his only experience. He's never lived in another haunted house or anything. And just how it affected him and his kids and how he dealt with it. It's pretty interesting. But it's talking to different people, different interesting people. I'm kind of a people person anyway. And so I can kind of find a common ground with anybody. And so just to sit down and pick these people's brains about, because some of them have been researching and seeking out Bigfoot for as long as I've been doing ghost hunting. And so to pick their brains about their experiences with Bigfoot and some of the crazy stuff they've seen and dealt with or like dogmen or even time slips. I had a guy on talking about time slips. He's written 3 books about those and collected people's stories about them having time slips. And so it kind of fascinated me. And he wrote the book because when he was a kid, he had his own time slip and he grew up being very fascinated by them. And now he has a doctorate and like he's this really smart guy. And then some people that I just kind of revere in the paranormal I got to talk to, Dr. Moody I got to talk to him for like 3 hours. And Dr. Raymond Moody, for anybody that doesn't know, in the 70s, he coined the phrase near-death experience. He came up with that phrase because he has a psychology degree. He has several masters and a doctorate, very intelligent guy. He's in his 80s now. And he's still researching near-death experiences and shared death experiences and like these crazy things. But he was one of the first ones to do it scientifically at a prestigious college. And he wrote a book about it. And he coined the phrase near-death experience. So to talk to somebody like him, who not only is in the paranormal realm, but who's also a scientist and a psychologist and like, a very level-headed guy, is pretty interesting too, to pick his brain. And then other people like Andrew Perrin from the Conjuring House. to talk to the person that it actually happened to her family, and talk about the differences between the movie and real life and that type of stuff. Yeah, just interesting people. And there's almost 170 episodes that are still up on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you're listening to this show, you can find mine. It's everywhere.
And you wrote a book.
I did. I just published it in February. It's called Small Town Haunts and Legends of Tennessee. And it kind of came out of my love of those locations, like I was talking about, that you've never heard of. Unless you're from these small towns in Tennessee, you don't know about this haunted house or even the history of it. The book is probably 70% history, interesting history about the history of these houses, these Civil War houses, and even older, and the folklore that comes along with them. Because some of the stories are probably not true, but they've been passed down and told about these locations, and yeah, just fascinating things I wanted to write about. I guess I wrote the book because I was excited about the research. You know what I'm saying? And so once I had all this research, well, I'm going to go through with writing the book because, I learned so much about the state that I've lived in my whole life that I didn't know, history wise and paranormal wise. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. But the book is broken down into 4 sections. The first one is legends. So I have stuff in there about Bigfoot, about all these different legends that you probably never heard of. The Tennessee red cheetah, the Wampus cat, Catzilla, which is a giant catfish the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, weird stuff like that. Spearfinger, which is the old Cherokee legend. Yeah, and the legend of Nakatoon and Conestoga, which is an interesting legend. And then the legend of Reelfoot Lake, how the actual Native American Reelfoot Lake legend of how it was created from what the Native Americans have passed down with their stories. And then I went into West Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, and East Tennessee. And that's kind of how the state's divided up. And that's how it's referred to by everybody that lives here too. 30, 40 towns per section. And then there may be 2 or 3 locations under those towns. So, yeah.
Wow. I hear about, I don't know, just growing up, you hear about the chupacabra and the Jersey Devil and those things, but I didn't realize there's so many. I guess it would be specific to where you live and the state you're in. They have their own, legends of what they saw.
Yeah, you have things like West Virginia. You have Mothman, which is a huge one.
Oh, yeah.
In Hopkinsville, Kentucky, you have the Hopkinsville Goblins, which is so many people know about that all over the world. You also have in Kentucky, you have the Popelik monster, which the Popelik monster is like this goat man that kills people by throwing them off the train trestle. There's the Falk monster, which is like a Bigfoot type creature. Yeah, you have all these cryptids and legends all over. And then you have these urban legends that kind of touch the paranormal, but in the paranormal, we call them tropes, because you have the lady in white who was the bride not to be. So for whatever reason, she's haunting this place now. Or one that seems to be making its rounds again is the one where if you park on the train tracks, the kids will push you across and you'll see their handprints if you put back. Yeah. There's like 3 towns that claim that really happened. And San Antonio is the one. San Antonio, Texas is the one that said it really happened. It doesn't. There's no historical proof that a bus of kids got killed or, any of that. But there's several places across the United States where they claim, that works. So you have things like that turn into legends that really, the hitchhikers, are a big one too. The ghost hitchhikers is a big story. So it's pretty interesting.
We had there's in Richmond. So when we had my wife, Heather, so she loves paranormal stuff. Like we watch it quite often, but in Richmond where we're at, there is the Richmond Vampire. And it was like this, like at Hollywood Cemetery, they actually have crypts that are built into the side of, hills and cemetery. It's pretty big. And they said this Richmond Vampire exists in one of these places, and there's an old tunnel that they used to have in Richmond where you would just, walk from one part of the city to the next that, collapsed, and then people tried to get through it and kept killing people. It's interesting to hear these stories because every year it comes up and, people are like, it's in the news or something. Do you remember the story? Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it happens all over like that with the Falk monster, Mothman. Now there's sightings of Mothman type creature in Chicago. And there's even been, I think, 2 authors that wrote a book about the Chicago Mothman. And but the interesting thing is that I found, because I very much, I love all these stories, is that some of these little towns where these things happened, that's their claim to fame. and them embracing it and doing a Falk Monster Festival. Well, that's when they bring in all the tourist dollars. So that is the only influx of cash that little town will see all year, is them embracing, that legend. And good for them for using it, because like I said, otherwise their little main streets might not, little mom and pop stores might not survive all year, but they get an influx of thousands of people for their monster festival or alien festival or whatever it is. And it helps, keep them alive and is their livelihood. So yeah, it's, even though it happened one time in 1945, it's like, well, it's still an interesting story, and them capitalizing off of it was pretty interesting. Point Pleasant definitely has with the Mothman. I mean, you got the Mothman Museum. They have the big giant metal statue.
They got a museum?
Yeah, there's a Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant. And so, and there's umpteen Bigfoot museums around the country.
Yeah, I've seen those before. So before we get out of here, I'm curious if people are listening, they're like, I would like to capture some evidence of ghosts. How can they do that? What would your suggestion be?
I'd say the best thing to do is find a public ghost hunt in your area. There are a lot of teams that do them, and find a reputable one that actually lets you be part of the investigation. Doesn't just tell you to sit back, shut up, and watch us, because there are those out there. And I think that's ridiculous. But find one that'll let you be part of the investigation. I always make the people part of the investigation because they paid to be there, And so I always tell them it's your investigation. I'm just here to help you and kind of teach you the techniques. But I would go to one of those, maybe several of them, to kind of learn some of the techniques. But also different people do things differently. And so, these people might be doing it the way that you think is right or you like, different techniques, and other people, may not be. And then you don't need all the equipment you see on TV. A cell phone with a voice recorder on it. I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't use a voice recorder. I use my cell phone. The microphone on my cell phone is so sensitive when I use the voice recorder app that it's crazy. You pick up everything. And so, and even the camera on your phone. And the biggest thing is take lots of pictures. We take pictures in bursts of 3. And a lot of times you'll capture something in one of those that aren't in the first 2. Well, that's evidence of itself. If you just capture one picture, it's hard to say, well, what changed there. But if you capture 3 and you got something in the first picture, but that next 2, or one in the middle, or the one in the left, you can kind of see the progression there. And especially if you have like the live pictures on your phone, those are pretty cool. I've seen people capture evidence of those. But also educate yourself about lens flares and things, so that it's, it's not something that is paranormal. Don't always believe, and with the TV shows, don't always believe what you're told, But I would say go find a public ghost hunt and go see what it's all about. And you'll learn a lot on a public ghost hunt.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's great advice. I was curious because, we have these, I don't know what they are. I guess it's the white noise, the radio things on the apps on your phone. And then all of a sudden, like a word will pop up or whatever it is. And it's, it is what it is. I love the audio portion of it. I have this microphone, but this wouldn't be good. But, if my cell phone can pick it up, I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. Like I said, people just need to know it doesn't take all that equipment to do any of it, at all. I'm not a big cemetery person, but I know people that go out to cemeteries and get clear voices and answer the questions and things. So,
yeah. Have you ever seen those videos where people are driving Teslas through there and they pick up people walking in front? And you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. There's also a famous video that you can go find from the Gettysburg battlefield where people are walking through their dash cam. There's a cannon on the side of the road when they're driving through Gettysburg, and their dash cam catches what looks like 2 men run up to the cannon like they're trying to operate the cannon. It's pretty crazy. Like, it's pretty clear. The apparitions are pretty clear. Gettysburg's crazy. I went to Gettysburg a couple of years ago, and that place is the whole town is haunted. It's a pretty crazy place.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Goodness, there's so many people. Woo. Well, Eric, I really appreciate your time and education and the stories. If I make my way out to Tennessee, you're expecting a visitor to your house, the Night House.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation. I love it when the time just flies, because that's when it's been a good conversation.
Most certainly, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And please stay in touch. I hope that we do get to see each other soon.
Yeah, you're out this way, holler at me, and we'll do something spooky for sure.
To be featured on Critical Incidents, email us at criticalincidencepod@gmail.com.